morning, good afternoon, good evening, viewers, wherever you might be. I always say that because there are 7 continents, different time zones, and some are just waking up, some are midday, some are probably just sleeping or what have you. We are still here. This is Atlantic Discuss. I'm still your host. My name remains Ade Balogun. Today, we're doing a post-mortem on the last judgment from the Nigeria Presidential Election Tribunal, and we're actually doing a state of the continent. After the Queen Gabon, we've not really done anything concrete on that. Today, we have our friend, investigative reporter, man of the world, man everywhere, special man, David Hundeyin. David, welcome to Atlantic Discuss.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Thank you for always creating time for us. I know you are very busy, so let's just hit the jugular and go straight to the point. Here at Atlantic Discuss, we embrace all facets of humanity to disseminate positive news in a world filled with a lot of bad news. We give a lot of voice to the unheard. Always we balance the information equation. We search and discuss the facts wherever it leads. We combine the best of the human race to get the best out of mankind. We serve as a bridge between the developing and the developed world. We embrace IT, sport, politics, history, and faith-based issues. We don't shy away from the fact. That's why we bring people that will always give the fact. So let's go for the jugular as usual. Aftermath of the Queen Gabon, David, do you expect a spread in the continent?
Not really, because the coup in Gabon is a bit different to the coups that came before it. Unlike the coups that came before it, which could be classified almost as, to an extent, people-led revolutions, the coup in Gabon, even though the people in Gabon were very happy to see the back of Omar Bongo, from all indications, the coup in Gabon was pretty much a palace coup led by a faction of the ruling family with the tacit support of France. So the person who has been sworn in now, the General Brice Nguema, is actually the cousin of Ali Bongo. So it's looking like the king is dead, long live the king. The French response to the coup in Gabon was markedly different to the French response to the coup in Niger, because the coup in Niger clearly took them by surprise, and it was clearly a very unwelcome development from their point of view. But the Gabonese coup, if you see the way they reacted to it, they were almost like, the reaction was completely different. The hostility with which they reacted to the Nigerians was completely absent. And within 24 hours, they're already making noises about how they're willing to work with the new guy, blah, blah, blah. So it's clear to me, to my eyes, that there wasn't a coup in the conventional sense of it in Gabon. There was a palace revolution in Gabon, and the people who are in power now are a different faction of the same group that has always been in power in Gabon. So for now, I think there's this sort of honeymoon glow because people are just happy to see the back of the Bongo surname at the helm of that country. But I fear that the Nguema dynasty might just be starting.
Oh, wow. But the other question was, do you think it will spread? I mean, it's the gala of coups happening now.
Well, so that's
I mean, for another reason, do you think, for example, because most of these coups, more than half of them are based on election-related issues, when people are not satisfied with the election result and,
Yeah. So the Gabonese example, I don't think there's going to be much spread because it wasn't a people-led thing, as I said earlier. It was like a palace coup. So except there is a faction of people in other African countries that have already been planning such palace coups, which was clearly the case in Gabon. Except that is the case, it's unlikely that there's going to be that kind of contagion. I think the type of coups which actually reached contagion were the ones in Niger and Burkina Faso, because those ones were clearly intended and clearly interpreted by the people as anti-colonial, anti-French revolutions. The one in Gabon, not so much. In fact, one of the very first things that the new guy did, Brice Nguema, before he was even sworn into office, one of the very first things he did was when I think he was speaking to the French foreign minister, and he made a statement to the effect of that he's willing to continue the partnership and the relationship that Gabon has with France. As you may or may not know, Gabon is a very important country to France, which is almost entirely economically dependent on France Afrique for its status as a first world country. So he essentially said, in fact, it's Ali Bongo who was trying to move away from France a little bit, that, we are open for business. We want France. So it doesn't seem like this is that kind of coup. which is going to ignite similar passions elsewhere in the region. Doesn't seem like it. It seems, if anything, I don't want to accuse the French of staging a palace coup, but if I were a conspiracy theorist, that's probably what I would be saying, because it would seem as if, the French are very, very happy with this development. Their silence, their strategic silence tells a very, very loud story.
So is it fair to say that, okay, the French have learned their lesson, that they are being preemptive? What do you think? That instead of waiting for somebody else to do it, let's put somebody there that we can trust. Since it's going to spread, since it's going to spread anyway, let's have military men
what they're doing.
Oh, okay, all right. So there's a possibility that, like, if it's going to spread, France could be the one spreading it. Like, okay, let the coup happen, but let's have people we can trust. All right,
I mean,
fantastic.
they've done it before, so it's not it's not without precedent.
Okay, let's quickly look at Cameroon and Togo, because I've read people saying that those are the likely places they see happening, So, I mean, both of us don't have crystal balls. We're not soothsayers. We're not Togolese soldiers. We're not Cameroonians. And we're definitely not Togolese and Cameroonians. But with the way things are, do you think it's a possibility in either Togo or Cameroon? Are there any indications?
I mean, I don't have eyes on the back of my head, but as far as Togo goes, Togo specifically, I don't really see it. Not necessarily because there's no appetite for it, but because sometimes it's possible for a country to be so small, even in terms of population, that it's almost like logistically almost impossible to accomplish this sort of thing. So I think the country with a comparable size to Togo would be Equatorial Guinea, which has had a coup attempt in the relatively recent past. And the only reason the coup attempt was even possible was because there was foreign financing, and it was very directly financed. The coup that involved Mark Thatcher, which was a huge embarrassment to the British establishment. The only way to even try to carry out that coup was to finance it directly from outside, because the country is so small that absolutely everything that is happening within the country is monitored by the regime. Togo is that kind of country. So the Nasingbe dynasty, if you like, which has been in charge since 1958, is just so deeply entrenched, and the country is just so tiny that where does any coup plot or coup plotter want to even see everything is visible to the regime in charge. So I don't see it happening in Togo. Cameroon, however, now that's a very interesting one, because Paul Biya's response to the spate of coups was a clearly panicked response. People didn't really seem to pick up on it, but his response was basically to increase the salary of a bunch of military officers. Essentially, he paid them off, as far as I'm concerned. He paid them to maintain the status quo. And the thing is, that will work for a while. But first of all, people will realize that, hey, probably they've been asking for that pay raise since they didn't get it. Now that there's a threat of a coup, suddenly they go, oh, it's okay, you could have done these things since I didn't do it. Which means if I want more in future, it's possible for me to get more because this money is actually there. That realization will have stuck. And then the sort of myth of invincibility that he has built around himself, I think, has been damaged, because people have realized that, okay, it's actually possible to make this man panic. So I think, because Cameroon is a fairly large country as well, and it's also a country which has a significant amount of complexity and diversity, unlike Togo. So I think it's not an impossibility. Obviously, it's going to be difficult because there's obviously a significant French military presence in Cameroon. And obviously, the French are also very deeply connected with Paul Biya, and they clearly still find him useful, which is why he's still there, even though he doesn't rule the country in person. He rules it from a hotel in Geneva. But the French are happy to maintain that status quo for reasons best known to them. So it will be difficult, but I think the conditions for a coup possibly do exist in Cameroon. Whether it will happen or not, it's not whether it will happen, it's when it will happen. When it will happen is what we don't know. But I think the conditions possibly are right in Cameroon.
Fantastic. I think I agree with you to a very large extent there, because apart from that, you said something, there's a lot of diversity in Cameroon. You have the Anglophone people that they still want their freedom, and they have been militarized, and all that. So that issue is still there. More so, I think with what happened in Gabon, the French could also be worried about the succession plan in Cameroon also.
I think they are.
So I think if with all the octogenarian in Biya's government, the Senate president, too many old people, too many, long-time generals. So if Biya drops there today, I think there will be a lot of problem. And from experience also, you see that every time a dictator dies, a dictator has been there for a very long time, the
Civil
succession
War.
plan, if not well, civil war, if not well managed. I still told some friends over the weekend that if any of Mobutu's children was living in Congo, well entrenched in Congo, he might be president today. Because even the people, when you roll 20, 25 years and you go, the people compare the dictator with the new leader. Today, there are people in Congo
Exactly.
that still think Mobutu was a good leader. You understand? Look
Yeah.
at Kirikou in Benin. He lost an election to Soglo. 2, 3 years into Soglo, the people said they wanted Kirikou back. So it's always easy, very difficult to get stability after being ruled for a very long time. So I agree with that. But having said that, the dictators in Africa, they are quite a number, you know. If you look from Teodoro Obiang, Sassou Nguesso in Congo, you know, our good friend in Rwanda, even though seemingly doing well, is equally a dictator, you know. It's looking like a lot of that. They're not reducing in numbers. Omar Gwele is there in Djibouti, Asaya Safewaki in Eritrea. There are quite a number of them. The recent succession in Algeria was just a continuity, just like the Gabonese one of the old regime. So it does look like this dictatorship issue, you know, it's never going away. So, which goes to my next question. Do you think democracy really, really works for Africa? Do you think it's our recipe for government and leadership?
I think democracy is a global standard. However, I also think that there is no single standard for what constitutes democracy. I think there is such a thing as, if you like, democracy with African characteristics. So the way China has what they call socialism with Chinese characteristics. So even though that's an economic ideology, but
Mhm.
for a governance ideology, I think there should be such a thing as democracy with African characteristics. Simple reason being that Africa has a unique experience compared to the rest of the world, even in terms of colonization. Even though other parts of the world were also colonized, Africa has a unique experience. So the transition from colonial to post-colonial and ultimately to what hopes to be a democratic system of governance needs to be managed well and has not been managed well. I think it was Lee Kuan Yew who said something which has never left my mind ever since I read it. He said, for a democracy to be useful, or for a democracy to actually exist functionally and to be useful, two conditions need to exist. First of all, the vast majority of the population needs to be highly educated.
Mm.
So the population needs to know exactly what they are using democracy to do, right? Not that they are voting people because they gave them t-shirts and granules and chin-chin, right? A population that actually understands what an ideology is and how government affects them and the power that their vote has. So that's first of all, the population has to be well educated. And then secondly, there needs to be a hierarchical political system where there are two parties which oppose each other, but which generally actually agree on the most fundamental issues, but disagree on how those issues should be faced. So in the US, for example, where you have the Republicans and the Democrats who appear to be Tom and Jerry on the surface, they appear like they really hate each other. But actually, when you get right down to it, their basic ideology, which is basically very big on personal freedoms, freedom of capital, freedom to achieve your own self-actualization, capitalism, they share those values. What they disagree about is issues like abortion and gay rights. They fight on issues which are sort of loud on the surface, but which aren't actually systemic issues. But at a granular level, they actually agree with each other. So that's what Lee Kuan Yew said. You need a well-educated population and you need political parties which are in agreement about the most basic things and only disagree about how to carry out those aims. In much of Africa, the first condition has not been met. A lot of the population, even if it's literate, is deeply uneducated, right? It's not just in Nigeria. We see this across sub-Saharan Africa where whoever can sing a catchy campaign tune, can hand out free t-shirts and bags of rice, and whoever can make noise is who becomes the front-running candidate more often than not, which is not a sign of a well-educated population.
Mm-hmm.
And then secondly, that instead of having political formations which are broadly coalesced into one or two, you have 70 political parties competing in one election, and all of them have wildly different ideologies. Some of them, they believe that the country should be run according to Marxist communist ideals. Some of them are extreme right-wing capitalists. Some of them, none of them has like a real like solid majority. So it's just different groups of fractured people fighting each other. Based on Lee Kuan Yew's words, a democracy cannot really exist under such circumstances. Under such circumstances, what will almost inevitably happen is a dictatorship, which is what has happened in Africa. So it's not so much that democracy doesn't work in Africa, it's that the conditions for democracy to work and for it to actually flourish, the preconditions have not been met. So we're trying to build a skyscraper called democracy on top of beach sand. And we've not excavated that sand, we've not done any piling, we've not done any structural reinforcement and created a foundation. We are just building on top of sand. And then the building keeps collapsing, and then we keep on blaming the building. That it's because democracy doesn't work. No, it's not democracy itself that is at fault. It's our fault for not ensuring that the preconditions for democracy to exist actually are in place before trying to create this big electoral democracy system.
Wow. So let's come closer to Nigeria. Under the military junta of Ibrahim Babangida, we had the NRC and the SDP, Do you think what he was trying to do then is similar to the Lee Kuan Yew school of thought?
That's what he was trying to do. But unfortunately, you can't do that using military fiat. It's something that has to evolve on its own. There was no military dictator who sat and created a Democratic National Congress and a Republican Party, right? Those two formations kind of developed on their own. There was no king that sat down and created a British Labour Party and created a Tory Conservative Party. Those things evolved naturally on their own, right? In South Africa, for example, the ANC was a sort of natural, it was a political formation that coalesced out of the specific circumstances people found themselves in. And then now there's something else called the EFF, which is also organic, which is coming into its own. There's the DA, which is also organic. Nobody created those things by fiat. In Nigeria, on the other hand, we have political formations that were created by fiat. So going back to even 1999, the party we refer to as the PDP, it was created by military fiat. It was not an actual political party. In 2013, the party known as the APC, something similar happened. It wasn't the military, but it was a group of disgruntled people who came together and basically used some form of fiat to create a political party without any actual ideology. There was no reason for that party to exist except we feel like we've been out of power and it's our turn. So that's kind of like the problem. So I think the closest thing we've seen in recent times to some sort of organic political formation is the so-called obedient movement. I won't even say the Labour Party, because the Labour Party itself has existed for many years and has loads of internal issues. But I'll say the obedient movement, which is what sort of turned the Labour Party into the phenomenon that it became this past election cycle. I think that's the closest thing that we've witnessed in a generation and a half to an organic political movement forming, which is why I strongly believe that if the so-called obedient movement doesn't actually want to take over the Labour Party, which I think it should, but even if it doesn't want to do that, I think it should actually go and sort of constitute itself into a political formation on its own, become a political party. It might not be called the Obedient Party, but find a name and call it that. And, I think these are the preconditions toward creating something that is actually remotely democratic. Because prior to that, I think we've been going through the motions of democracy. We're very good at practicing the form of democracy without the substance. But I think we might just be seeing some green shoots of it.
Interesting. So let's look at, before I go to my next question, let me ask you this. Is there any country in Africa today, maybe 1, 2, or 3, in your opinion, that seems to have what you call democracy, something that is worthy of emulation in current day Africa with 54 countries?
I'm always very careful not to go and overpraise, because I know every single African country has issues. But again, maybe because of the relatively small size, so it's easier to govern. But you have countries like Botswana, which appear to have all the hallmarks of stability while running a system that is, significantly more democratic than we are in Nigeria. I mean, even looking at the global rankings, Botswana is one of the few African countries which is colored in green. So there's two shades of green, there is yellow and there's red. So the dark green is full democracy. Light green is partial or troubled democracy, and the yellow is hybrid authoritarian, and then the red is authoritarian dictatorship. So we in Nigeria, we are the yellow, we are classed as hybrid authoritarian. But Botswana, Namibia, Ghana, they are classified as partial or troubled democracy. I don't think there's any country in Africa that is classified as full democracy, not even one. But at least there are some that are still in the green, like Botswana, Mauritius, Namibia, Ghana. Ghana with an asterisk because Ghana is sliding down. Ghana is following in the path of its big neighbor to the east. So,
Interesting. Thank you. I mean, I think Botswana is a fantastic example. It's not just politically stable, it's also economically stable. There's a lot of transparency, and recently they are making headway with America on their Go America Growth and something act, they call it. So let's look at the recent judgment from the appeal court, the PEPT, Presidential Election Tribunal in Nigeria. All the three petitioners, that's the APM, the Labour Party, and of course the PDP, all their petitions were thrown out. Everything from the forfeiture case to non-compliance to double nomination to perjury, every single thing was thrown out. Not one dissenting or minority judgment from all the five appeal courts. What's your take on that entire judgment?
So, I mean, the less said about it, the better, because I try as much as possible not to.
That's why I framed it the way I did. I said, okay, no dissenting judgment. What's your take? So I want you to put it in your way. Yeah.
So I think if there was previously any doubt about the extent to which the Nigerian system lacks any single modicum of shame and will ridicule itself in the process of trying to maintain the status quo, I think that judgment has laid everything to rest. Apart from how ridiculous the judgments themselves were, if you read them, just putting that aside, even the way that they were delivered, right? We had, I've forgotten her name now, the only female justice on the panel, who was screaming.
Yeah, Justice Sumono, I think. Yeah, the lady.
Who was screaming at petitioners. And it was as if this was like the APC National Secretary screaming at the PDP and Labour Party. And this is a judge. There was no attempt to even pretend to be impartial or to pretend to have any interest in upholding the law. There was no attempt. Right? This is not the first time that we're seeing a ridiculous judgment given in Nigerian courts, but I think this is the first time I personally am witnessing judges acting in such a way in front of TV cameras, basically like stripping themselves naked and acting the fool. I've never seen such a thing before, certainly in my lifetime. So I think what this judgment signified to me is that possibly a meeting has been held somewhere where it was decided that, look, regardless of whether this makes any sense or not, this is not about the law. This is about the reaction of the people. And if the people are willing to let this go, then let's press on our advantage. Let's take everything that we have, because who cares anyway? I personally, that's how I see it. I think that, I know that, for example, there was more than one judgment, which was actually written, right? We've known for weeks that the possibility of the so-called rerun was real, because there was actually a version of a judgment where there was a rerun that was prescribed. There was no version of the judgment where Tinubu was disqualified, because apparently that was a red line which they had drawn for themselves even before the case consideration even began, which is why it always sounded like they were working their way back from a predetermined answer to a question. They had already determined they were going to disqualify Bola Tinubu, but the definite possibility of a rerun existed. And in fact, people who I won't name had actually reached out to several people, including me, who were perceived to be part of the BDN movement, to pitch some kind of collaboration or whatnot, because it was an open secret in Abuja that there was possibly going to be a rerun. Now, on the day of the ruling, or the day before the ruling, what the judges would have needed to see to convince them to actually put out that rerun judgment would have been mass action, like NSAS style mass action. That did not happen. Nigerians stayed inside their houses. Nigerians made a lot of noise on the internet, on Twitter Spaces, on Clubhouse, but on the day of the judgment and the day before, everybody stayed in their houses. The total number of people who actually came out to demonstrate on the day of the ruling wasn't up to 300 people. So knowing what I know about them, it's clear to me that they would have seen the opportunity that, okay, these people don't actually have any fight left in them. So let's press home our advantage. Let's, instead of striking down a few and then letting a few slide and then using the pretext of a rerun to still, legitimate, because even if it was a rerun, it would have still been, so I've ended up in the same way, because a rerun that Tinubu himself would have conducted. Tinubu is not going to oversee an election which is going to put him out of power. So a rerun would have been a waste of everybody's time anyway. But let's not even go ahead with that. Let's press home the advantage. Let's strike down every single prayer, strike down every single petition, no matter how stupid our arguments are, strike it down, and know that we've done our job. And then when it goes to the Supreme Court, obviously, Kaide Ariola is there to rubber stamp it. I fully expect his judgment to be even worse, because he's even more shameless, if I'm allowed to say that, than the appeal for justice. So it's actually Nigerians ultimately who have to shoulder some of the blame, because knowing the kind of country that we come from, it's always been known that whether it's the judiciary, whether it's the executive, whatever level of government it is, it always responds to some form of, I don't want to use the term violence because it's not violence, but where there is real energy that is directed, that is targeted at the Nigerian government of any description, that's what it responds to. The Nigerian government doesn't respond to light arguments, doesn't respond to talk, doesn't respond to common sense. The Nigerian government responds to aggro, to action. That's what it responds to. So unfortunately, when people decided to stay indoors on September 6th, I guess those in charge saw the opportunity and they've taken it. So, however, the good news, if you can call it good news, is that the window never closes for Nigerians to decide that they've had enough. The window is always open. At any point in time, Nigerians can decide not to cooperate with their ongoing mockery at any point in time, but, up until there comes a time when Nigerians make that decision, we are going to be having these conversations, unfortunately.
Oh, wow. Interesting. So now let's look at this, right? A lot of people have said, I've heard one, two people say, oh, it was a fantastic judgment that the Labour Party lawyers especially didn't do their due diligence and they could have done a better job. In your opinion, do you think there were areas that the Labour Party lawyers were caught napping or they did not do very well in?
Absolutely
Considering,
not.
yeah. Okay.
Absolutely not. So people who say that probably did not read the judgment. They probably didn't read the judgment. They probably read headlines. Because if you read the judgment, you see, for example, where the judge told a lie in one of the judgments. The judge said the Labour Party did not specify in which polling units any irregularities took place. If you had followed the court proceedings, I cannot forget that day where the Labour Party rode into court with several boxes worth of those from EC8's result sheets, which obviously specify which polling center, which polling units, and exactly what alterations were made, what mutilations were made. All of this was tendered to the court. And then the judge in the ruling said that they didn't do it, which was a lie. The judge told a lie in his judgment. So when you have a judge who is, wearing the judge is supposed to be a referee, and the referee is wearing the shirt of the opposing team, then there's no point. There's nothing you're going to do that is ever going to be good enough. That's just the reality. So I think both the Labour Party and the PDP, I think their legal teams both did excellent work, and here we are. And the reason I'm so certain about this is because, maybe this is like your exclusive. So, this is the first time I'm saying this publicly. But I worked with both legal teams, both the Labour Party legal team and the PDP legal team. I worked with both. I did, a significant amount of research. I passed across documents. I worked with both. Obviously, it was like a pro bono thing for me because I have a very strong ideological view in all of this. And I was willing to even stomach Atiku than to even countenance, having a drug criminal as my president, which is why I was willing to do this. So I know the extent to which background research was done, the sheer amount of homework that was done by both petitioners. I'm aware because I was part of the process. So anyone saying the Labour Party or the PDP didn't do their work, that person didn't read the judgment. That wasn't a judgment. That was basically, as I said, there was a predetermined answer, and the judges worked their way back from the answer, which they had already determined that this has to be answered no matter what, to whatever nonsensical question that they come up with. So, for example, you had the judge in court saying, regarding the issue of the drug forfeiture, for example, instead of engaging with the issue, which is there's a forfeiture of $460,000, according to legal precedent, which has been set by none other than the Chief Justice of Nigeria himself, Kayode Ariwoola, a forfeiture is proof of criminal activity and constitutes a form of criminal conviction in itself. Instead of engaging with that, the judge completely sidestepped that and said, oh, there was some letter from the US Embassy to the IG of Police in 2003, where somebody named Bola Ahmad Tinubu was cleared supposedly of all criminal activity. So that means that this presidential candidate known as Bola Ahmed Tinubu is free, right? Two completely different people. And that's what the judge put out as his ruling, that because of this supposed letter from the US consulate to the IG of Police, therefore Tinubu has no case. And even regardless of whether it was a forfeiture or not, the forfeiture of funds was regarding Tinubu's bank accounts and not Tinubu himself. So in other words, I shot you, but it was my gun that shot you, it wasn't me. That's what the judge said in court. So when a judge is giving you that kind of judgment, why are you wasting time talking about whether you did a good job? It didn't matter what you did. The judge is compromised. And I would say that categorically anyway. Those judges are corrupt. They have been paid off. They are compromised. It's as simple as that.
Interesting. So let's talk about Atiku. I mean, you mentioned him that you work with both teams and all that. Atiku has a case in court, in Illinois with the Chicago State University, Bola Tinubu, and what have you. And I read somewhere yesterday that the court will expedite action on the case because Atiku is in a hurry. He has to file within 14 days. That 14 days now looks like 8 days, because of the time frame that all appeal has to go to the Supreme Court. Do you think that case can be a game changer in all the Nigerian election petition tribunal?
No, because as I said, the existing case, which has just been ruled on, was already enough of a game changer. There was enough. I mean, how much evidence do you want? If it wasn't this, it was that. If it wasn't that, it was the other one. And I won't even say they found ways to strike down each one, because they didn't even bother to find ways to actually strike down each one. They just came and told a bunch of lies, found some silly technicalities. So, for example, with regard to his perjury charge and the fact that he didn't indicate that he had Guinean citizenship on his form E-9, they just came out and said, well, even though, yes, whether he has Guinean citizenship or not, which constitutes perjury, doesn't matter because the proof of Guinean passport wasn't filed in some way or something. So in other words, yes, we have this evidence that he committed perjury, and we accepted it as evidence in court. But the way he filed it, there is some procedural issue, so we've tried to throw it out. So if Atiku likes, and if Obi likes, they can get a written injunction from Jehovah God in heaven, written in celestial ink, to Kayode Ariwoola stating Bola Tinubu is a drug criminal, he committed perjury. Kayode Ariwoola will find a way to say that God did not file this thing properly. So God's petition is struck out. That's what will happen. Like, let's not kid ourselves about this. But the reason I'm looking forward to the Supreme Court's hearing is that I want to see Kayode Ariwoola himself look himself in the eye and overrule the forfeiture, the ruling on what forfeiture is, which he delivered in 2014. I want to see him say that even though this legal precedent which I created in 2014 exists, I'm going to overrule myself and say that I was talking nonsense and that this is a new rule which I've made up on the fly. I want to see him do that, because the minute that happens and that is captured on camera, that's the minute that I think that's the minute Nigerians finally will stop taking these people serious and will finally realize that it's time to tear this whole thing apart. It's time to find a new way of doing things. That these people who are supposed to be constituted authority, these people who are supposed to be the system, they are just common criminals. And there's no point respecting them as anything other than just common criminals. So that's actually what I'm looking forward to.
Yeah, but what I was even trying to say is that with the case in Illinois right now, what if the court in Illinois now instruct the Chicago State University to release every single document Atiku has asked for? And it's now obvious that, okay, this gentleman was not the one that is the president, is not the person that went to the school and all that. I mean, clearly...
But the thing is, it's already obvious now. It's already obvious now. I already did this story since November last
I know,
year.
I know. I listened. We've talked about it so
Right?
many times.
And the evidence that went into that story wasn't something which I just gathered using open source intelligence. This was obtained under subpoena. It already has probate value. And they found a way to ignore it already. So if you like, you can get something from the US Supreme Court. You can get something from the Supreme Court of Heaven. You can get the highest probate value in the universe. The Supreme Court of Nigeria will find a way to sidestep it. Because if the appeal court could do what they did, again, even though it's like 700 plus pages, I'll advise people who haven't read, at least just scan through the judgment, just to get an idea of how ridiculous it was. Because a lot of people are running around with the idea that will be an article went to court to argue about, oh, they snatched our ballot box at so and so in both local governments, and then they weren't able to prove it, therefore they lost the petition. That's not what happened at all. At all. People have no idea the sheer miscarriage of justice that is taking place here. So please go and read through that.
You trust me, I have already. I'm actually doing it for a second time. So before we go, I have just two quick questions for you. And the first one is, we've talked about it already, but I just want to pick, since you've read it and I've read it also, so all the key five major issues at stake. So I'll start with the Shetima case, the way they ruled. Let's quickly look at that. Because the judges were saying something like Shetima did not intentionally do what he did, that by law, the president was morally obligated to have a VP irrespective of that. So that was the reason why they threw it out based on what I saw. Do you think that made sense at all?
Not at
And
all.
I'm talking the Shetima double nomination now.
Well, not at all. It's one of the most widely understood tenets of legal practice anywhere in the world. This idea that ignorance is no excuse under law.
Right?
For the first time in my life, I've seen a court deliver a ruling saying that ignorance was an excuse under law. They said he did not do it intentionally. I've never heard of such an argument put forward by a judge in a court before, that this wrong thing happened, this thing that is illegal happened. But since the respondent didn't do it intentionally, then it's fine. I've never heard of such an argument before, because again, if I shoot you dead tomorrow, in addition to the fact that it's my gun that did it and not me, I will also argue that I didn't do it intentionally. Apparently, so there's this very problematic legal precedent that has been created here that, first of all, I don't know since when it was a court's place to judge intent, to judge whether something was done intentionally or not. Because as far as I understand it, the purpose of the court is to determine whether something happened or didn't happen, not what the intention was of the person who did it, as far as I'm aware. So when you have a court that is purporting to read minds and is saying stuff like this wasn't done intentionally, you are creating issues. Apart from the miscarriage of justice that is taking place, legal precedents are being created. Somebody's going to take these arguments that you have created now and use them tomorrow in ways that you didn't foresee. And that's the problem. That's the real issue for me. The real issue is not the fact that you ruled against Peter Obi or you ruled against Abubakar Atiku. It's that in the process of doing that, you have rubbished the Nigerian constitution and you have created precedents that will take decades to work through if Nigeria doesn't end up getting a whole new constitution altogether. So good luck to the Supreme Court in just unraveling all of this, because this is a nightmare. This is a mess. And I really hope at the end of it all that whatever it was that all these people are getting from Bola Tinubu, I really hope it's worth it, because this, to me, seems like a lot to put at stake, a lot to put at risk just because of one man's ambition. But again, we wait and see.
Fantastic. I know we've touched on the perjury issue, we've talked on the forfeiture. So let's just look at the non-compliance, INEC non-compliance, or one of the major fulcrum of both cases, that the electoral law, 2022 electoral law has amended. INEC made a lot of promises. They requested for 355 billion thereabout. More than 50% of that money was supposed to be used for technology. The technology INEC told us was going to be used and all that. At the end of the day, glitch was the excuse. Now the court is throwing all that overboard, and people are now bringing video statement made by INEC to enforce that. How do we reconcile that based on what we said so far? How could the court just throw that out when there's glaring evidence that even INEC said they were going to do that? Is there something we don't know here? Because I'm a bit confused myself,
Yeah, I mean, there is clearly a lot we don't know. I mean, I'm struggling to sort of communicate what I want to communicate without, using non-TV friendly language. But where something is clearly stated, not just in one place, in like 5 different places, it's been stated in writing, it's been said in speech. Yakubu Mahmoud went to Chatham House in London. I was there. And he went and made a categorical statement. So and so and so will happen, so and so way. He said it categorically. There was no ambiguity in what he said or how he said it. This was also stated in the Electoral Amendment Act. There will be live transmission of results. This was the INEC itself has put out more than one statement stating categorically results will be uploaded live to the IREV server. Such and such and such will happen. There was no ambiguity about it whatsoever. And then you have a judge. I mean, we know INEC, we know they're a bunch of criminals. So I'm putting them aside for now. My problem is the judge, right? The judge then put out a ruling saying that even though the Electoral Amendment Act said that results will be transmitted, that the word transmitted does not imply electronic transmission. That it just said transmitted, that could mean anything. That was the ruling that a judge sitting in Nigeria's second highest court said. So, I mean, at this point, there's a kind of despair almost that this creates, that we are now at the point in Nigeria where you can literally say that 2 + 2 is 59, and the court will agree with you. Because apparently, like, make a categorical statement that a 5-year-old can easily understand is now something that the court needs to, there are so many issues. So where the Constitution says that the FCT is stated very clearly, the FCT has special status, and the winning candidate must have 25% of votes in the FCT. He now turned that on his head and say no, that the FCT is just like, it's just like the states now. The problems that this creates. So, for example, now we've already seen FCT, indigenous of the FCT have already approached the Federal High Court, stating that Wike should stop parading himself as Minister of FCT, since the FCT is now a state, like any other state, that they want a governor and they want 2 senators. These are issues. These are issues. Because part of the reason why the federal capital was moved from Lagos to, an area carved out called the FCT was because the role of the Ministry of the Interior and federal government and the role of the governor of Lagos, they kept butting heads, right? That's why there's a Ministry of FCT. There is no governor there. It's very clear. Now you have created complication that did not exist. All because you are trying to protect one man. These are the issues.
All right. So last question for you. I know you're always very busy. So from what we have seen, from what you have said, it does look like, okay, whatever appeal the petitioners take to the Supreme Court, the trajectory of that case is almost like a slam dunk that Platinum Bull will be exonerated, he will be president and all that. People that are very pro-Bola Tinubu have come out to say, well, you never know, even with all the baggages, it could be the one to bring Nigeria out of the doldrums and all that. But we should overlook the past and let's move on. He's going to change the Nigerian system. He's going to probably, a lot of the Southerners want a constitutional conference. He's going to do those things. He's going to bring Nigeria out of the doldrums. What matters at the end of the day, their opinion, is that Nigeria becomes a better country and all that. So if Bola Tinubu can do that, we should let sleeping dogs lie and move on. Do you agree with that?
I think that anybody who has that point of view, there's a bridge in Guaguala that I want to sell them. Because if somebody genuinely has good intentions for leading a country or whatever, then the way to which power is acquired in itself is a very vital part of that process of having a good intentions, right? There's a brilliant analogy that Peter Obi made a few weeks ago. That you can't say that you want to clean a house and then you are entering the house through the window. Why are you doing that? You are entering the house through the window, like you are breaking the window and entering like a robber, and then you say you want to clean the house. Who are you deceiving? If you want to clean the house, you will knock and ask to clean like a normal person should do, right? If you believe that you have good intentions for Nigeria, go and run for office and let the people choose. And if people don't want you, they don't want you. That's what democracy is. You cannot force yourself on people that categorically did not vote for you, and then say that you have good intentions for them. Which good intentions do you have? If your intention is to serve them and they don't want you to serve them, and you insist that you are going to serve them, then what you are doing is not service anymore, even legally speaking, because consent is important. So anybody who is saying that they should please stop deceiving themselves, they should come out and own it publicly that they have a vested interest. They should come out and own it publicly. There's a vested interest here. We want this guy to be president because there's something that we hope to get out of it. And, let's all stop deceiving ourselves.
Interesting. Well, thank you, David. Thank you for your time. Thank you for coming to Atlanta Discuss. You're always welcome, and we appreciate the time you give to us. This has been fantastic. 45 minutes. We did a post-mortem on the last appeal court judgment of the Nigerian election, and we took a look at the state of the continent vis-a-vis coups, Cameroon, Togo, and we've looked at it holistically. Went for the jugular, stated just the facts, and the facts are what we do here. Now, David, before you go, is the future bright for Nigeria?
I think the future is as bright as Nigerians decide it is. The future has as much promise as Nigerians want it to have. If Nigerians decide that they want to do something different, that they want to see something different in their future, they will see something different. As I said earlier, the window for an end to all of this mockery and malfeasance, that window never closes. There's an opportunity every single day. There is no time when Nigerians do not have hope. At any point in time, Nigerians can decide that we have had enough. We can do better than this. We deserve better. At any point in time, they can do that. If they decide not to, well, too bad for them. But if they do, obviously, they will get the results, because at the end of the day, there's 200 million people or so, and there is less than 1,000 people who are sitting on top of the destinies of all 200 million people. If the 200 million people decide to wake up and stand up for themselves, there's nothing that Tinubu or Justice Samani or any of these people can do. That's just the reality. So it's up to Nigerians. This is something that the Labour Party's vice presidential candidate, Yusuf
Dati Baba Media,
when he was in a TV interview and he was asked, is the judiciary the last hope of the common man? He said, no, the common man is the last hope of the common man. I completely align with that. If Nigerians decide that they want something better, they will get something better. There's nothing that can stop them.
Thank you, David Hundeyin. Thank you for coming to Atlanta Discuss. To our viewers, thank you for keeping faith always. Thank you. Next week, we'll come to you again with another topic. This time out, we're calling it a wrap. Thank you. God bless you all. Bye.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome always, David.
All right.
Bye.